With over 15,000 tools available, selecting the right MarTech can be challenging. Meet the MarTech Intelligence Report's free buyer's guides, exploring specific platforms including purchase considerations, leading players, adoption trends, and more. No matter where you are in the purchase journey, MarTech Intelligence Reports can help.
Welcome, everyone, and thanks for joining us for Consent, Compliance, and Trust in the AI Age. I'm Tim Hillison, founder and CMO of Entry Point One. We partner with engineering-led startups and mid-market scale-ups to build performant GTM systems, unify revenue, and scale with agentic AI. Today's conversation sits at the intersection of speed, regulation, and trust. It's where everything in marketing is moving now. Together, we're going to unpack three things. First, what privacy-first personalization actually looks like when AI is driving the workflows. Two, how intelligent systems manage preferences and consent dynamically. And three, how to balance performance with responsibility when the rules are still catching up. Today's session isn't about theory, it's about execution under real-world pressure. And if you have ideas, please pop them in the chat. We're going to be answering your questions towards the end of the session. My goal as moderator is to keep this practical and grounded. By the end of the session, you'll know how to design trust in AI systems, measure it meaningfully, and be able to communicate it within your organization. So compliance isn't just a checkbox, it builds confidence. All right, let's meet our expert panelists. First up, Jean Jennings, CEO of Email Optimization Shop. She's been helping enterprises and mid-markets with optimize their email for over 25 years. Hi, Jean, how are you?
Oh, I'm great, Tim. So excited to be here.
Thank you. Next up is Neil Jennings, lawyer and founder of GLF Strategic Compliance. Neil specializes in AI governance and international privacy law. He leads companies to turn compliance to trust instead of tension. Hi, Neil. How are you?
Hi, Tim. I am great. It's absolutely wonderful to be here.
Thank you. And finally, Chris Black, a fractional and marketing operations leader who builds transparent systems that keep AI-driven work accountable and measurable. It's great to see you, Chris.
Hi, Tim. I'm so happy to see you again.
And for those of you just joining, I'm Tim Hillison, founder of Entry Point One. We partner with engineering-led startups and mid-market scale-ups to build performant GTM systems, unify revenue, and scale with agentic AI. Together, this group brings together the right balance of strategy, compliance, and real-world execution. Exactly what this conversation demands. But before we jump in, let's hear from you. On your screen, you will see a short poll pop up. Just one question. Which of the following challenges related to AI privacy and personalization is currently keeping you up at night? AI consent compliance, changing regulations, performance versus privacy, real-time management. Take a few seconds to choose the one that best reflects what you're facing day to day. All right, let's give it just a few more seconds so that everyone can weigh in. I wonder what it's going to be, right? I mean, I know what I'm thinking. Panelists, I think you are too, right? Remember, to get to the poll, you need to log in. And you'll see it on your screen. Then you can choose one answer. Okay, let's publish the results. Wow, looks like the top answer is performance versus privacy. It's not surprising, and it's a great setup for where we're headed next. The first question goes straight to the heart of the conversation. How do we keep judgment human when algorithms are making more of the calls? As AI systems personalize and optimize decisions, how do we make sure we keep the human in the loop, or HIDL, right? So personalization remains helpful, not manipulative. Jean, let's start with you.
Oh my gosh, Tim. I mean, that is the core of the issue right here. I always say that AI is a tool, it's not a strategy, it's not a value system, it's definitely not a substitute for good marketing judgment. I don't see the risk being that AI personalizes too much. I think the risk is that AI may not personalize in the right way or within context. That's where things can drift from helpful into manipulative. So let me give you an example. A couple years ago, I was working with a company. We had a marketing automation platform that had an algorithm to help us deliver more relevant content via email to their subscribers. So pretty much everyone in the company was a subscriber. And one of the issues I was faced with when I went into help consulting was a group of the higher execs came to me and said, look, we're on the email string. We don't understand the content we're getting. We don't feel like it's relevant to us. So I went back to talk to the vendor to try to understand what the algorithm is and see how we could tweak it to try to improve it. And after a lot of calls and a lot of discussions, what I learned was the algorithm was a black box. And literally, the vendor trusted it implicitly. The vendor said to me, you know what? Those execs you're talking to, they must be mistaken about what they've browsed on their website. They must be mistaken about, what they said is their preferences. That's where we come into problem. When someone says the algorithm is right, the people must be wrong, that's where you get a problem. Because at that point, you're starting to tell people that the AI knows them better than they know themselves, which just simply isn't true. That's also not how you build a relationship with someone. So what's the solution? Human oversight, spot checking, QA, a healthy dose of a gut check, because the algorithm isn't always right, but your customers are.
That's fantastic, Jean. I love that setup. Neil, could you please bring in your lens from a legal and governance point of view?
Of course, and what Gene said is absolutely correct. Of course, the algorithm is not always right, and that is something absolutely critical to be worried about, to be mindful of. We need to make sure that there isn't bias in the system, and how do we do that? Well, one of the ways is to have that QA process in place. This is a governance thing; it's not necessarily a technical thing. And where is the bias in the system? Are we looking at things like accuracy? Manipulation isn't a single legal concept, but a lot of it relates currently to user interface. Perhaps in the future, we're going to be looking at algorithmic bias. And like Gene said, what's happening in the black box?
That is fascinating, not only as you pull out UI, but that it is not one single legal construct, right? Let's move on to question 2. Trust can show up both as emotion and compliance. So, how should marketers define it today? As a feeling between brand and customer, or as a measurable risk metric? Neil, I'm going to start with you. What do you think?
The truth is, it's both of those things. It's a crucial consumer expectation, but when it comes to building community and ultimately sales, it is a measurable legal outcome. And the core metric that we have to look at is the escalating cost of getting things wrong. The classic example, as I saw you post on LinkedIn recently, Tim, was Facebook and Cambridge Analytica. Violations of privacy rules resulted in the largest one-day drop in company value in the history of the stock market and everything that goes with that. So compliance isn't getting any less complex. Now, in the US, we are seeing clear penalties for failing to honor consumer choices. The FTC hit Experian with a $650,000 fine for deceptive marketing emails. California's regulator is getting stuck into Honda and Sephora, and its largest ever fine against Tractor Supply, nearly $1.5 million for similar technical failures. Internationally, if people are active in Europe or the UK, we have wider reaching laws like the Digital Services Act, the Digital Market Act. Europe is handing out eye-watering fines in the hundreds of millions of dollars for things like invalid consent and non-symmetrical design. And the UK is no different. So the fact is, it can be hard to measure the top line impact of trust, but it's really easy to measure the bottom line cost of getting things wrong.
That's fascinating. Jean, now what's your take on how that definition shows up in real programs?
I totally agree with what Neil said. It's not an either or. Trust is both a feeling and a measurable outcome. I always think of compliance as being the floor. That's the lowest level you've got to reach. But trust is really the ceiling. And trust is where you're going to have your successful relationship with your customers. I come from the email marketing world, and I was speaking to a lawyer who works in my area recently. And it was so funny because he said, "You are the only industry I've ever run across that regularly goes above and beyond what is required of them by law." And that's because we have to. We have the industry, the email marketing industry self-regulates with regard to deliverability and getting to the inbox. And I think that's really important. And so, yes, trust is emotional. It's how your audience feels about your brand, but you'll know when you've lost it because the metrics will tell you.
That's fascinating. Chris, is there anything that you'd like to add from an operations standpoint?
Well, absolutely. We're talking about trust as a marketing construct here, but it's an organizational one. In this AI era, prospects aren't just seeing our website and our emails, they're seeing the Glassdoor reviews, they're seeing G2 ratings, they're seeing social sentiment, leaked screenshots, maybe, and AI is exposing this all instantly. So there's a disconnect when we say that marketing um, owns that experience because the whole company now, right? Our employers, our users, our partners, AI is exposing all of this faster than we can spin it. So that means we can't just have trust as part of the comms plan. It has to live as an organization and how we live, and how we treat people, and how we deliver our products, and how we handle their data. So the role of marketing is to make sure the story aligns with what the truth is, as the internet already knows it to be.
Thanks, Chris. I think that we all agree that, trust is an organizational construct, as you're saying. Here in MarTech, because most of us are marketers here, it's really how we can work together across the team to build that and bubble that up within our work. So what I'm hearing, again, from all of you is that trust isn't static. It's dynamic, measured in consistency and transparency. And one of the things that I loved that Neil brought up is the non-symmetrical design, right? And this is going to bring us to our next question: how we operationalize consent in real time. So if consent is shifting from a checkbox, right, to a live data signal that changes as preferences evolve, right? What does it take to make that system work in real time without losing transparency? Chris, let's start with you.
So you're right. We've had the checkbox for years, and companies should already have this automated real time. The unsubscribes, the preference centers, we've had this for years. So it's about consistency rather than speed. So when we think about our stack, we've got our CRM, our marketing automation tools, our sales engagement, and even now these AI co-pilots. Each of these systems is interpreting consent data in its own way. So one system might seize an opt out and stops all emails. Another might interpret it as no marketing activity. And yet the person that's opted out will still see the personalized ad on LinkedIn. And because, technically we're compliant, but we've just broken that trust. So we've seen this play out, right? A user unsubscribes from product updates, but then they get we miss you as part of a re-engagement campaign. It's not malicious, it's just completely disconnected, but the customer doesn't feel like we've listened. So to operationalize this, we need some shared context. The clear cross-team understanding of what each consent state actually means and how it should trigger or suppress across all of the various systems. So that means marketing, operations, and legal. We all need to come together and define these rules and audit how they're propagated. So not faster consent pipeline, but more of an alignment in how we interpret and act upon those signals. And that's what's going to keep personalization powerful and respectful.
Can you give us a little bit of an example and double click on that? So we're talking about alignment, and you're talking about rules based, right? We all get those rules from that, nurture campaign gone awry, right? However, Chris, I would like you to come back and let us know, give us one example to make this tangible for our audience.
Yeah, so having dashboards. I've been implementing trust teams within organizations, especially with AI on board. And so we're looking at these dashboards and seeing what these all mean. So the first is defining everything, so everyone comes together and has that definition. But now making sure that all of that has propagated out and being able to look at a dashboard and be able to see here's how we're measuring trust. Um, those unsubscribes, all of the different metrics we're looking at today, but also making sure then that that's propagating out to any of the various systems. So there may be customer success systems, there may be CRM versus the marketing ops systems, making sure that all of these are coming together. Cool thing is you can start to vibe code these things now so that your dashboard is across systems. Used to be we had to have Tableau and all of this really chaotic data, and trying to pull them together was really hard. But with MCP servers, with vibe coding, all of these APIs are now easier for us in marketing to be able to access. We can get dashboarding in a way that we've just never had before, and start to see where maybe there's offsets.
So what I'm hearing is that it really is not only this rules-based sort of MO, but it's also how we're pushing it out to the teams and we're working as a team consistently. And that's super interesting. So Neil, from the legal and governance lens, I'd love to hear what your thoughts are this as the organizations evolve.
Of course. I mean, look, I'm going to steal a quote very briefly from Gandhi, who said, "The moment there is suspicion about a person's motives, everything they do becomes tainted." Now, I think that's a really nice blanket statement to kind of bed everything in. Making a live consent system work, really, from a legal governance regulatory standpoint, whatever you'd like to call it, it requires four checks, in my estimation. First is technical reliability. Can you comply with the relevant laws, whether we're talking about direct or indirect marketing, mailing list versus pixel? Are there opt-outs? Are there opt-ins? Are there subject access requests? Whatever you need to comply with. Second is transparency. Are you telling people what you're doing with their information simply and clearly? Third is autonomy. Have you given individuals continued choice in an appropriate way? Like we talked about, that appropriate way is it's seeming to become the concept of symmetrical. And then finally is necessity. And this one's really important. Is the information really required to carry out your core business? And I think if you answer yes to all of those, you're building trust in a compliant way. And if you didn't, you have an opportunity to maybe realign and address some of those gaps. But it's all built on a business's concept of risk tolerance and how they see trust in themselves and in their consumers.
So interesting, that construct of trust and how it's defined within one's organization. And that means different things to different organizations. And so even though we have AI as an equalizer, still there's going to be a lot of differences. Let's move on. When automating compliance with AI, how can companies balance both that speed and governance? Specifically, how do leaders protect both performance and integrity? Neil?
Yeah, look, this is a great question, and this is so important. To me, it's much more about governance than the technical side. Obviously, I'm biased. But either way, the starting point is management's position to risk and company culture. If you're getting AI FOMO, that's exactly when we need to stop and think. For years, we've seen companies treat fines just as a cost of doing business. A month ago, Google was fined 300 and something million euros again for violations. And if those sorts of fines, or even smaller fines, aren't part of your company's risk appetite, then what is it that you need to focus on? Firstly, distinguish your strategies. We said a minute ago, direct and indirect, so mailing list versus pixels and beacons, they have different rules because they're about slightly different things. One is about communication and one is about data. So understand those rules and align on execution. Are we going to fragment by country? Are we going to take a single unified approach or something more pragmatic? Secondly, don't overreach. Just because you have AI that can do something with your data doesn't mean that it should. Clearview AI has just been fined a few days ago in the UK for using data way beyond purpose. That was in the millions of pounds. And then finally, it's about supply chain. Do your due diligence. What tools are you using? Do they work as intended? Will you be able to comply with the relevant laws? And importantly, if those tools fail, are you appropriately protected? So really, it's about permission and processing of personal data on one side and vendor due diligence on the other.
And Jean, you have been helping enterprises and mid-markets with their email strategies for years. I'm sure you have a real interesting POV on this one.
Yeah, I mean, I think everything Neil said was right. I'm probably going to restate it more in layman's terms. But yeah, I had coffee a couple years ago with the heads of one of the big marketing platforms, and we were talking about use of my services for his clients. And he basically literally came out and said, well, they don't need a strategist. The platform does it all. And that's just not the case. The way that, you can't delegate responsibility. And that's why you need a human involved. There was that case recently, I think you and I talked about it, Tim, where there was an automated chatbot giving information to an airline customer. And they sort of said, yes, that will be, this price. And then the airline was like, no, it was wrong. And that's the kind of thing you can't delegate responsibility. And that's why you need to keep humans involved. The idea is to use AI to scale governance, not replace it.
That's fantastic. I think that again, the human in the loop, right? And how we're going to make sure that these AI systems, don't go awry, and that we're building that trust and maintaining ourselves compliant. And Neil, what an example with Clearview in the US too. So again, what I'm hearing is balance doesn't mean slowing down, right? It means building systems that really build that trust, but that flex under pressure, right? And I think that is, it's so interesting, but it takes us right to the next questions. How brands are going to move beyond compliance to build real trust. So, again, and Jean, you said it so well. Compliance is the floor, trust is the ceiling. How do brands move beyond checking the box, right? To earn this genuine trust, not just lip service trust, right? And especially where regulation lags behind expectations. So, Chris, I think that you'll have a unique view on this based on what you said before. What do you think?
So in this case, I actually think of trust as the moat rather than the ceiling. And I think of Apple when I think about this, right? They're not leading in AI features right now, but the customers don't care, right? I mean, they might care a little, but not enough to get away from Apple, and that's because they trust that Apple is handling their data responsibly. That trust buys time, loyalty, and forgiveness when they're lacking in innovation. So it's a brand equity that you just can't fake or automate. So as marketers, right, trust compounds. Every transparent message, every privacy first choice adds to it. When your competitors are chasing clicks, your advantage is the credibility that you've already earned.
How interesting. I think that that's fascinating. Jeannie, what do you think about this?
Yep, it's Jean, Tim.
Oh, Jean, I'm sorry.
That's okay. Like I said, I come from the email industry. So I think what I always tell my clients is don't ask yourself, is it legal to do this? Ask yourself, is it smart to do this? Will this build the relationship? I mean, for example, I have a B2B client. We have a nurture series. We wanted to segment it based on the industry that the recipient was in order to make it more relevant. So we basically went out and asked people what industry they were in, and we started adding that to the opt in form. And then when they got the nurture series that talked about their industry, there was no question of where we got that information because they knew how we got that information. And I think that's really the key. And again, that goes back to transparency and relevance. So don't over engineer it. Don't try to kind of figure out and manipulate things. And honestly, if there's something you want to know and they're not comfortable letting you know it, you probably don't need that information or shouldn't really try to work with that information.
Fantastic. So we've heard so many different points of view now. I think that what I'd like to do is go to a rapid fire round. So what I would ask all of the panelists is in 30 seconds or less, give us one prediction about how trust and consent will evolve over the next 2 years as AI becomes more and more embedded, not only in marketing, but throughout the organization. So, Chris, I'm going to start with you.
I love it. So I think trust is about to become both more measurable and more human. We'll track it in our CRMs like we track pipeline, like the opt-ins, the preference changes, the data accuracy. But the real shift will be in the tone. As AI gets faster, these brands that slow down and ask permission, show their work, they're going to earn deeper loyalty, and trust will live where metrics and empathy meet.
That is so interesting. With AI and becoming more optimized, we're going to become more human. I love that, Chris. Jean, your turn.
Awesome. I agree with everything Chris said, but I also think there's going to be real winners and losers as we move into the AI age. I think people that use AI as a conduit, as a tool, and keep their programs human are going to be the winners. I think the people who delegate responsibility and authority and those things to AI are going to be the losers. Because if people don't understand how you're using their data, if you're not transparent about it, they're not going to stick around. And I think what I'm seeing is with AI, if you delegate to it, the transparency goes away.
Fascinating. Neil, bring us home.
I mean, those are two great answers, and I completely agree. I think we'll see two things. First, a messy environment when it comes to AI vendors and contractual liabilities. That's one thing. But I also think we'll see a push to regulate beyond the front end user interface and increased scrutiny over the back end and algorithmic issues when it comes to things like what is really impacting consumer choices and challenging whether consent is freely given. I think that's coming in the next few years.
That's fascinating. So, again, what I'm hearing is that this trust is all about momentum building. Chris is telling us we're going to become more human. I love that. And Jean was talking about how it's evolving. And then, as a lawyer, Neil, you're telling me, look, we're going to have a bit of atomization of regulation, front end, back end, right? And it could get a little bit more complex. So, it's interesting. So the future isn't about eliminating risk. It's really about earning confidence at the speed of change. And so I want to say thank you to our panel for those insights. And now we're going to transition to take some questions from our audience. So if you guys have questions, please pop them in the chat. And here's one right now. It says from CC Anderson, I heard a speaker circle of lawyers who advised not to utilize or use summarized notes by AI and computer software for the C to M suite positions, meaning for the executives, right? Do you have any thoughts about marketing regarding AI technology and what to not put everything out in the world mindset? And so, I think, Chris, I'm going to hand this to you. What do you think about that?
I think it's a really interesting discussion, and I'm of a couple of minds. One is these AI note takers can help make things just easier for us, right? We can be hopefully more engaged in the meeting. I don't personally use them because I like to write down my notes. They stick in my head a little bit better. Um, but I could see where there's issues, especially in the C-suite, where if you've got a note taker and you're putting it into your CRM or into your database, I bet Neil has more thoughts on this one, but that's all discoverable, right? And if you're saying stuff that perhaps shouldn't be in a court of law or maybe out in the public, so if something gets shared, yeah, you probably don't want your note taker in that particular meeting. Uh, so we want to be a little careful and stuff like that. Neil, I would love to hear what you have to say about this.
I mean, yeah, you're absolutely right. And it is a great question. And, the wonderful thing is that people are actually thinking about these questions before they're doing things. That's amazing. There's all sorts of issues across different jurisdictions in the UK, in Europe, in the US, and Canada. I've got experience across all of those jurisdictions. But yeah, fundamentally, if you put something in a note taker, even lawyers are having this issue. A lot of that stuff actually is no longer protected from a privileged perspective. So, yes, you are essentially creating potentially discoverable notes, ones that you don't want to be discoverable. So, it goes from the concept of just having a quick face to face or phone call into you've basically written this down. Um, Regardless of marketing or not marketing, your people should be very careful of what they put into AI tools anyway. From a privacy perspective and from a data usage perspective, your consumers have expectations, they have rights, depending on where we're active. So it's not just a free for all to say, oh, hey, I have this AI tool, therefore. There needs to be a little bit of thought. And then beyond that, it's really a matter of what do you want to use it for, and will using it in that way help you get your results.
What's really interesting, Neil, is the use of notes, and Chris and Jean, I know you know this too, is boards can't use them specifically for what you mentioned, Neil. And so I think that, again, when we have these, as Spider-Man would say, right, with great powers comes great responsibility. And so we really need to be conscious of that. Love this. Let's move on to our next question. Neil, this one's for you. We've talked a lot about compliance and consent, but how do we actually measure trust? You mentioned something to us earlier in the conversation about the cost, and I'd like us to go a little bit deeper and be practical about that.
Yeah, of course, and it's very important. I mean, look, the concept of trust today is very different to what it was before the sort of digital age. We don't currently live in a particularly high trust society. And, Gene, Chris, Tim, like between the three of you, we've all mentioned about how maybe consumers didn't expect to be contacted this way. They thought they'd done this, and then they get this other email from, and how did this all happen? And so the entire concept can really be boiled down to, why do you have my information, and what are you doing with it, and did you tell me about this? And that's the whole concept. If we bring it right back down to first principles, privacy notices, transparency, and consent mechanisms, that's what that is all about. So you can measure trust basically by saying, here's what I've told people I'm doing, here's what I'm doing.
I love that. Jean, I know you have thoughts on this. Tell us?
Yeah, I mean, I agree with Neil. I mean, all of us are marketers, but we also have parents, we have siblings, we may have children, we have friends. You want to treat your customers the way you would treat those people and the way you would want those people treated. It's interesting too, because kind of the line kind of shifts. I remember when browse reminder emails first came about, people were just shocked that, we got this email and it's exactly what I was looking at 5 minutes ago on the website. And oh my gosh, how did they know? And now nobody really bats an eye when they get a browse reminder email. So that line of what they're familiar with and what they're comfortable with also shifts, and therefore kind of the trust level shifts. But again, just think about, would you want this to treat your mom or your spouse or your sister this way? And then do that.
That's awesome. We have another question from Kelly Valentine, and she says, "Hey, I try not to put anything into AI that isn't or couldn't be found in the public domain. Is that the right approach, or should I exercise a more conservative approach?" What do you think, Chris?
So there's some really cool things that we can do to keep our data secure and still take advantage of all of the power that you mentioned earlier, Tim. So being able to download these LLMs, we can do document searches on our own laptops in a way that's very secure. We can do automations even. We can download an automation tool like N8N with our downloaded LLM to be able to search things in a way that's very safe. There's enterprise capabilities coming out now from a lot of these tools that should make things secure and safe. This comes back to trust, which is, of course, our topic: is who do you trust? Which brands do you trust with this power? But there are ways that we can do things in a smaller area that's going to be safe and secure and give us the power that we hope to have.
That's awesome. Okay, well, before we wrap, let's bring this all together, okay? What we've learned today: privacy first, personalization. It isn't just possible, it's already here, where systems are designed from consent from the start. Trust, both emotional and measurable. It lives in consistency, transparency, and follow through. Chris gave us some good topics about that. Performance and responsibility aren't opposites. The best GTM systems are built by the same architecture, and communication is a mainstay when there's a human in the loop. So I would like to give a huge thank you to our panelists, Jean Jennings, Neil Jennings, and Chris Black, for sharing their expertise, and to the MarTech team for hosting us in this important conversation. Audience, please don't forget to take a moment and rate this session. And up next, you can just press the red button at 3:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, 12:30 p.m. PST, what AI agents mean for marketing teams now and in the future. Don't miss it. It builds directly on what we've covered today. Tim Hillison here. I'd like to give you a big thanks for joining us. This has been wonderful. Thank you.